This is a Hollow Knight theory I've had for a while, and now that the Pale Court mod has reignited interest in the 5 Great Knights, seems like the best time to make it. While all the 5 Great Knights besides the Dung Defender, also known as Ogrim, are mysterious in their own rights, Hegemol is the only of the 5 where we don't even know what his face looks like. Faces are already a confusing subject in Hollow Knight thanks to the mask maker, and how masks are actually a part of most characters' faces, but Hegemol is one of the few characters to actually have a helmet covering his face. Let's take a step back though. One of the first bosses we fight in the game is the False Knight, a maggot that has stolen the armor of a knight. In the background of the White Defender battle, we see this armor belongs to one of the 5 Great Knights. Shio calls Hegemol a soft-spoken but towering figure, and Ogrim says he was a humorous fellow. It's made abundantly clear that Isma is the plant lady, Zamir is obviously the Grey Mourner since her words or used are similar, and Drea is the corpse in the Queen's Gardens because that has been confirmed all the way since the Hollow Knight Kickstarter. So by process of elimination, Hegemol is the one with the stolen armor. When you defeat the False Knight in dream form, the Failed Champion, which, side note, the name Failed Champion is interesting. The maggot says he stole the armor to protect his brother, so I doubt he actually participated in the Colosseum of Fools. I think this name actually refers to Hegemol, because 2 events Ogrim mentions are the Champion's Call and the Battle of the Black Worm. The Black Worm possibly being the corpse that the Colosseum was made in. The maggot also talks about how he stole it. Many people seem to think this dialogue implies that the maggot killed Hegemol. I personally never saw it that way. I suppose the reasons others see it that way is because he clarifies it wasn't madness which caused him to do it, which would imply he did something crazy, and murder is definitely crazier than stealing. Furthermore, the hunter says maggots are some of the most pathetic creatures in all Hollowness, so it's hard to imagine, even if one got a huge opportunity, that a single one will be even capable of killing one of the 5 Great Knights. Though, it could just be over-exaggerating because he's the hunter. But if the armor was just stolen and Hegemol's still alive, there's a high possibility he could appear as the secret boss in a future game. And wouldn't that be poetic? The False Knight's one of the first bosses we ever face, and the real knight could be one of the last. The only wrench in this theory is that the maggot being able to steal the armor off of such a big and powerful figure seems equally as unlikely as killing him, unless there's more than meets the eye. When the False Knight's mask opens, it doesn't come off like a regular helmet, but it opens sideways, more like a cockpit to a robot than a helmet. Furthermore, when the maggot explodes out, it has a very tiny body. No way those small limbs are reaching in the whole suit. So we have a few possible explanations for this. 1. Hegemol is actually a tiny guy that pilots a huge robot to seem more intimidating. 2. The armor was originally just armor and the maggot built a mechanism to be able to use it. 3. Hegemol's corpse is still in there and the maggot uses his body like a puppet. 4. The maggot just used cartoon logic and Team Terry didn't put much thought into it. 3 was, from what I know, a brand new theory presented by Born Losers Gaming. It wasn't supposed to be a super critical theory, but it really works. They presented the idea that the maggot killed Hegemol but did not take his body out, only removed enough of Hegemol's body for it to fit in the suit, and I add on to this with the maggot using the corpse like a puppet. Have you ever seen those videos where dead things are still moving even without their heads? That's because their nerves don't instantly die and still react the way they're supposed to. There's just nothing commanding the movements. So let's stretch that logic a little to say that he could replace Hegemol's brain physically controlling his nerves. This is honestly a highly possible conclusion. It makes sense, doesn't have any robot shenanigans, and is unneedingly disturbing, fitting in quite nicely with other Hollow Knight lore. Only problem is, if this is true, that means Hegemol is in fact dead, which is somewhat unsatisfactory. Theory 2 is not that interesting, and yet, again contradicts the hunter's description of the maggot, as it would need to be quite smart to build a robot controller in a pre-existing suit of armor. But I actually have evidence to suggest the hunter is over-exaggerating greatly. First, the hunter himself says that they will sometimes bargain for their life, showing a higher train of thought than something like a crawlid. They understand the concept of death, and even have their own ritual customs for the dead. But there's not much to this theory outside of a higher chance that Hegemol's still alive. Finally, Theory 1. Something a lot of Hollow Knight fans believe. It makes the maggot being able to remove or kill Hegemol much more believable, and gives reason for this video to exist. In any previous scenarios, Hegemol is just Hegemol. His body doesn't match any of the Hollow Knight characters, so we have no idea to believe he has any secret identity. But, if he's just a small creature pretending to be large, we give more reason to assume that his entire appearance is a fake, Additionally, he even is one of the few characters with concealed limbs. Even the Watcher Knights, who use very similar armor and have the same theme and connections to the city, have exposed limbs. Oh yeah, I forgot, not sure where to put this, but Hegemol has some special connection to the city as the False Knight drops the city crest, and the statue you put it into is of Hegemol. It seems Hegemol stayed outside the city when the gates were closed and was given a key to get back in, after whatever his mission was finished. So I've handpicked a list of the more likely candidates, because if we went through every character who can fit in the suit, we'd be here all day. So, the defining features we are looking for are male, soft-spoken, humorous, has 4 eyes, connections to the city and kingdom, possible connections to the Colosseum. Not necessary since it's just speculation. But some have been picked even if they don't meet these requirements. Let's start with the most iconic 4-eyed Hollow Knight character, Monomon the Teacher. Monomon is female, so you might think this immediately disqualifies her, but since we're already talking about fake identities, one could be using a different gender to further conceal their identity. Not sure why Hegemol would conceal his identity, but Hollow Knight lore is confusing, so we'll be examining all candidates with this in mind. She has vague connections to the city, being one of the dreamers and writing books about the Pale King. Was chosen by the Pale King to be a dreamer, so she has some connection to the kingdom. You could say her tablets are just seen as funny to the outside population with how hard they are to understand. But this falls apart when you actually look at the size of the characters. Take this with a grain of salt though, since I ripped the size chart off of Google Images to compare the characters. The eyes don't line up too good. She only barely fits from head to torso. The tentacles, even if they were to reach the very tips of the limbs of the suit, would have to curve all the way back around at least a little. And in this theory, the actual controls of the suit should be really tight for this maggot to be able to control it with its tiny arms. While it would be fitting for a scholarly person to use their many tendrils to control a robot to be able to be a fighter, they're simply too long to fit. There's also the fact that Monomon is supposed to be asleep to act as a dreamer, which will make a very convoluted timeline for the 5 Great Knights. So I'd say Monomon is not that likely. Even though it would be fitting, she literally does not fit. I do have one character that doesn't follow the robot suit theory, which is the Nail Masters. They fit decently well, with the only thing needing to be a different horn formation, which is probably entirely possible. And the band around their heads could have an extra pair of eyes under it. Though it seems a bit redundant for one of the 3 Great Nail Masters to live a double life as one of the 5 Great Knights, it's still worth mentioning. Next we have the Nail Sage himself, Sly. Sly is male, soft-spoken, outside of his God-Home fight, has some slightly comedic lines, only has 2 eyes, has 2 outfits matching the color of the city, a blue one matching the main color, and a maroon one matching the color of the high-class part, possibly dueled in the Colosseum, being a fighter, and since Oro lives near it. The second eye holes could be for his antenna to go through, as it lines up pretty well. Something a Reddit post pointed out, when flipped upside down, his mouth kinda looks like a second pair of eyes. Of course, this isn't a literal piece of evidence of how his face fits in and that he's being upside down, but rather a metaphorical visual clue meant for players. Next we have the Pale Lurker. According to the French version, is female, is anything but soft-spoken, could definitely be seen as humorous, throwing their arms around and making weird noises, was a previous champion, and is obsessed over the Pale King. The amount of eyes is unknown, but we can assume it's 4 based on the number of mask holes. Since they have 4 eye holes, you can line them up in different ways, but for the most part they do align, and of course it fits in the suit. The Pale Lurker is a super interesting candidate. Going back to the name of the failed champion referring to Hegemol, the Pale Lurker didn't actually fail to become a champion, but rather is a champion that became a failure of a person, completely insane without influence from the infection, obsessing over trinkets and idols, and since the king built a whole mechanism for Hegemol, allowing him to be the only person to leave the city, the king probably did have a good connection with Hegemol. Gender aside, the Pale Lurker is a pretty possible and pretty interesting candidate. Next we have the God Tamer. Also female, same 4 eyes helmet deal. Nothing particularly humorous, no notable connections to the kingdom, also a champion. Nothing to really say here, we just don't have much to go off of. The god taming part is interesting though. You could definitely see a person like Hegemol having a personal pet-like companion, and it's possible the mace bug was a pet of Hegemol's. Next we have Revik. Revik has 4 eyes, is male, soft-spoken, no real connections. Now arises a problem. Can Kickstarter characters be important to the lore? When Hollow Knight was in development, they had a bunch of random people who funded the game on Kickstarter add their own little characters to the game. Most of them are insignificant, and some of them are even self-inserts, so usually they have self-contained stories, except when they don't. Characters like Thistlewind exist, which are clearly related to other characters in the game, but at the same time come in contradiction to it. Markoth was said to be the only one in the entire Moth tribe to take up a weapon, but Thistlewind also carries a weapon and references Markoth, saying that there is one other that carries a weapon. So is Thistlewind just inexplicably lost to history despite being buried in a special gravesite by the Moths, or is the hunter being stupid again? Or are the characters in the Warrior's Glade not even canon? Doubt it. Either way, Revik fits the suit. The eyes align really good. He takes protecting very seriously, not much else to say. Also, Revik is a self-insert, which greatly undermines the possibility of him being an important character to the lore. Next up is Atra, the character that inspired me to make this video in the first place. Atra has 4 eyes, 4 arms, a big body, has a generally similar shape to Hegemol's armor. He also says he was once enraged, but is now at peace. Soft-spoken. Ironically, despite looking exactly like what you'd expect Hegemol to look like under his armor, Atra does not line up in the slightest. His eyes are way too far apart, his horns are not the right shape, and his limbs are either too big for the robot theory or too small to reach the ends of the arms for no robot theory. Next we have Gorb. Gorb is another Dream Warrior. I didn't actually know until now, but the Dream Boss characters are also Kickstarter backers, though the boss fights seem to be more solidified into the lore, with Galleon even being someone who failed to become one of the 5 Great Knights, hence why despite having 4 eyes and being a good fit, I did not include Galleon on this list, because it would make his entire character and story a lie. What was originally the insane ramblings of a character added as a joke seemed to at least inspired super important lore in God Home TLC, so Gorb is important. Gorb is male, has 4 eyes, a very loud voice, is a very humorous character, and had strong connections to the Land of Storms, by default making him more disconnected to the city. Gorb's eyes line up perfectly, and while the idea of a Great Mind character piloting a robot will be fitting, unless Gorb can change the shape of his head, he can't fit in this armor. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he could. Just seems like a Gorb thing to do. That's all the candidates I found. None of them are quite compelling enough to make a final conclusion, though. There's one final interesting aspect about the False Knight: the weapon. When you defeat the False Knight, the mace head pops off and walks away. This creature is simply known as the Mace Bug. If you skip the boss until getting the Dream Nail, and then Dream Nail it, it says, "Free at last." Just one final aspect that makes it a False Knight. But it does raise some questions. Did Hegemol always have this weapon, or did the maggot make it? We don't know what Hegemol's weapon is because he doesn't have one on his statue or silhouette. If Hegemol has always been using this, then that means he's been bashing an unwilling creature against things, which goes against how he's pictured as a funny and soft guy. But with all the other things messed up in this kingdom, it does not even out of the realm of possibilities. Or perhaps it was okay with this before, but after it was taken by the maggot, then it suddenly was no longer accepting of this relationship. But what seems to be implied is that the maggot made the weapon out of scrap. But the bit right before the head shows that it was a weapon at some point. Could be just a random broken weapon, maybe Hegemol's weapon broke in battle. The maggot might have broke off the original head and replaced it with something to fit more with its brutish nature. It ultimately doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to get at is, what was Hegemol's original weapon? Assuming this handle is even from Hegemol's weapon, it could have been a spear, a javelin, or really anything on a pike. So again, we just can't be certain of anything. So what do you guys think of all this? Did any candidates stand out to you? Did I miss any characters that would be good candidates? Let me know in the comments below. My goodness, this took way too long to make.